Idaho sells itself on potatoes, whitewater, and ski resorts, but scattered across its mountain ranges and high desert valleys, there are towns that the economy abandoned, the railroad bypassed, or the dust simply swallowed, places where the money arrived fast and left faster, and where what remains is often more interesting than what was built. 11. Leesburg. In 1866, Frank Barney Sharkey and 4 friends found gold below the North Fork of the Salmon River, and within a few short years, the town of Leesburg had swelled to around 7,000 people, an almost incomprehensible figure for a location that high in the mountains and that far from anything resembling a supply line. The town was named after Robert E. Lee by its founders, most of whom were Confederate veterans who had come west with the war still in them. The irony that followed is the kind that tends to go unmentioned in historical markers. When the white miners moved on, the Chinese miners who had worked alongside them stayed, operating the claims through hydraulic methods for decades longer. Their remains were eventually exhumed and sent home to China. By the end of World War II, Leesburg was nearly empty. Only a few dilapidated cabins and unmarked graves remain deep in the Salmon River Mountains, at a location that requires commitment to reach. The town gave up an estimated $40 million in gold. The men who found it gave up rather more than that. 10. Chesterfield. Chesterfield is a ghost town that doesn't look like one. Where Idaho's mining ghost towns ran on silver and gunfights, Chesterfield ran on agricultural faith and cooperative labor. In 1881, a Mormon settler named Chester Call led a group of families into the Portneuf Valley in southeastern Idaho and laid out a community on 2,160 acres along the Oregon Trail, not because church authorities directed him to, but because he decided to. That spontaneity made Chesterfield unusual among Mormon settlements of the era, and the community that grew from it had the tidy, wide-streeted character of people who believed they were building something permanent: a brick store, white frame homes, a meeting house, a school. The railroad that was supposed to validate the whole project was routed through Bancroft to the south instead. Winters grew brutal. Drought arrived in the late 1890s. Families left in waves. By the 1930s, Chesterfield was empty. Today, it sits preserved as a National Historic District, with 41 original buildings standing in the high desert wind. Guided tours run in summer. The rest of the year, it belongs to the silence that replaced the families who believed in it. 9. Delamar. The town of Delamar in Owyhee County earned its nickname the Honest Way. A former sea captain named Joseph Delamar arrived in the late 1880s, bought up the silver claims in the surrounding hills, and built a processing operation that extracted $13.5 million in gold and silver in a 5-year stretch during the 1890s. The operation produced 260 tons of ore daily. It also produced something nobody had accounted for: silica dust, released in enormous quantities as the ore was crushed. The dust settled into the lungs of the miners and the women and children who lived near the mills. The condition it caused was silicosis. Local legend holds that at one time, over 400 widows lived in Delamar. The name they gave it, the Widowmaker, was not metaphorical. A fire in 1900 destroyed much of the town. The mines ran out shortly after, and by 1914, Delamar was empty. The valley where it sat is accessible today by high-clearance vehicle on rough, unmarked roads. Visitors report a stillness there that doesn't feel entirely explained by geography. Bank safes sit open among the foundations, doors ripped off, contents long gone. 8. Gilmore. Gilmore sits at the end of a gravel road about 60 miles south of Salmon, at an elevation that made mining it a particular kind of commitment. Silver was found here in the 1880s, and mule teams hauled the ore down to a smelter in the nearby town of Nicolia until the smelter burned to the ground and the ore had to be rerouted entirely. When the Gilmore and Pittsburgh Railroad finally arrived in 1910, things looked briefly more promising. The railroad's nickname among locals was the G&P, short for Get Off and Push, which tells you something about the engineering realities of running track into a basin at that elevation. Around 40 buildings still stand in Gilmore, frozen at the moment the Great Depression arrived in 1929 and drained whatever was left of the town's economic logic. The ore had mostly run out before that. The railroad didn't outlast it by long. What remains is a remote cluster of structures in a mountain basin that most people drive past without knowing it exists. 7. Bonanza. Bonanza and its neighbor Custer sit in the Yankee Fork country of central Idaho. And for a stretch in the 1870s and 1880s, they constituted one of the most productive gold and silver districts in the Pacific Northwest. Bonanza got there first in 1876 and grew fast enough to need a toll road to Challis built within 3 years. The town had a school, a boarding house, hotels, restaurants, saloons, and 2 cemeteries, which speaks to something about the pace of mortality in a mining camp at that elevation. The second cemetery, Boot Hill, holds 3 people whose circumstances were unusual enough that the town decided they needed their own ground. 2 grass fires in 1889 and 1897 pushed most of the population toward Custer, and by 1910, both towns were empty. The Yankee Fork Gold Dredge, a 988-ton barge that worked the gravel as recently as 1952, long after the towns themselves were gone, now sits at the site as one of the best preserved dredges in the United States. The machine outlasted the town by 40 years and is, in its way, the more honest monument. 6. Custer. Custer was built because Bonanza couldn't contain everything the Yankee Fork mines were producing what it cost to live there in full. The General Custer mine, discovered in 1877, needed a mill, and the mill needed a town around it. And the town needed all the infrastructure that follows a productive mine into a mountain valley: saloons, a school, a jail, a Chinese district. At its height, Custer had several thousand residents living in a canyon where avalanches were not an occasional hazard, but a recurring cause of death. The cemetery contains the evidence. The General Custer mine produced millions of dollars in ore before the gold ran out, the mill closed, and the population dispersed. The Challis National Forest took ownership in 1966, and the site was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 1981. Today, it operates as a restored ghost town within the land of the Yankee Fork State Park, with guided tours, original buildings, and interpretive signs that describe what it costs to live there in full. 5. Bayhorse. Bayhorse got its name from a prospector who worked the canyon between Clayton and Challis on horses of a particular color. The prospector's own name apparently made less impression on his contemporaries than his animals did. The town started as a gold camp in 1864 and pivoted to silver a decade later when the Beardsley and Ramshorn mines opened and began producing in quantities that sustained a community of around 300 people for the better part of 40 years. Bayhorse became the longest continuously operating silver producer in Idaho before it was finally abandoned in 1915. What it left behind is among the most intact mill site complexes in the American West: stone buildings, charcoal kilns, a smelter that once processed 30 tons of ore daily, and mining equipment that the U.S. Forest Service has managed and interpreted since the 1970s. The canyon it occupies is narrow and quiet, and easy to miss from the highway. Most people driving between Challis and Salmon don't stop. The ones who do tend to spend longer than they planned. 4. Rocky Bar. Rocky Bar came within a serious political argument of becoming the capital of Idaho Territory, a fact that its current condition makes it difficult to process. The town started in 1863 on gold, grew into the county seat of Alturas County, and generated enough population and commerce to make the capital argument plausible to the people making it. A fire in 1892 destroyed most of it. The town rebuilt, partially, and then declined through the early 20th century as the ore ran out and the county government relocated. What remained was a cluster of structures in the Boise National Forest that continued to attract small-scale prospectors and stubborn residents through the mid-20th century. Today, a handful of ragged structures still stand in various states of resignation, maintained by the kind of people who seek out places that almost became something significant and didn't. The road is unpaved. The ambition that once justified the place is long gone, but the setting that attracted it in the first place, a mountain valley in the Boise foothills, has not changed. 2. Silver City. Silver City is the patriarch of Idaho ghost towns, which is the designation its own historical community gave it, and it is not wrong. The town was founded in 1864 after silver was discovered at War Eagle Mountain in the Owyhee Mountains, grew to 2,500 residents and 75 businesses within 2 decades, published Idaho's first daily newspaper, and served as Owyhee County seat from 1866 to 1934. 3-foot stacks of silver bars reportedly lined up outside the Wells Fargo building, waiting for the next stagecoach out. A 500-pound silver crystal from the Poorman mine won a gold medal at the Paris Exposition of 1867. The mines produced over $60 million in ore before they ran out around 1912, and the last full-time resident, a man named Willie Hawes, who had been born in the town, served simultaneously as mayor, police chief, fire chief, and postman until 1968. Today, about 70 buildings stand, all privately owned, many by 3rd and 4th generation descendants of the original miners. The Idaho Hotel reopened for tourists in 1972 and still operates in summer on propane refrigerators and stoves. No new construction is permitted. The town exists now as a legal preservation of a specific moment in time, accessible by dirt road from Memorial Day to October, which is when the mountain lets you in. 1. Bayhorse's neighbor, Atlanta. Atlanta, Idaho sits at the end of a 35-mile dirt road in the Boise Mountains, at an elevation of 5,400 feet, which is one of the longer commitments required by any ghost town in the state. Gold was found here in 1863 and 1864, and the town that grew around it had the ambitions of a much larger place, a post office, a hotel, a school, mills, and at its height a population of several thousand people who had made the calculation that the gold justified the location. The calculation was wrong in the usual way. The ore thinned, the mills closed, and Atlanta shrank through the 20th century until it reached its current condition, a handful of permanent residents, a scattering of structures, and a reputation among backcountry travelers as one of the most isolated communities in the lower 48 states. The middle fork of the Boise River runs through town. The fishing is extraordinary. The people who live there year-round have made a particular peace with the road and the distance. And they will tell you, without being asked, that the isolation is not the problem with Atlanta. That is the point. Idaho's economic history is a study in extraction of gold, silver, timber, phosphate, taken out of the ground or off the mountain and shipped somewhere else, leaving behind the infrastructure that served the taking. The ghost towns are what that process looks like when it's finished. Some are preserved, some are collapsed. Some have one permanent resident who holds the whole thing together by refusing to leave. All of them are at the end of a dirt road that most people decide isn't worth the drive. The people who make the drive tend not to regret it.